Welcome to Aging is for Everyone. I'm Laura Mondello, and I'm your host for the show. Anyone who has been a family caregiver knows how much easier it is when you know what your loved one wants for their care. How do you open those lines of communication between all of your family members, though? That's the topic of our show today. And I'm very happy to welcome Beverly KUBALA, who is a geriatric care manager with her own firm, Geriatric Care Managers of Western New York.
Hi, Laura.
And Jack Sullivan, who is a family caregiver who has had a lot of different experiences with caregiving. Welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Laura.
It's so great to have you guys here today. Caregiving is difficult enough sometimes, but if you throw in families who don't know how to communicate, it can become really challenging. Bev, what are some of the biggest communications issues that you see with families who are caring for a loved one?
I think it's just that lack of ongoing communication before the crisis hits. Oftentimes when I get involved with a family, it's when there's a crisis, when mom or dad is in the hospital, they've been told that they can't go home, they don't know what to do. They've never had a discussion with their loved one about what their wishes are, what their finances are, any of those kinds of things. They don't know if the appropriate documents are in place. So it's really very important for families to have those discussions proactively about what it is that your loved one really would like, how they would like their end-of-life issues handled, but also how would they like their finances managed? Where would they like to spend the rest of their life? So those are some really big things that families really need to talk about.
Right, right. And I know that, Jack, you've had some issues with your family. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your situation with your family?
Well, my parents were married for 60 years before my mother's death about 2 weeks ago. I have a brother and a sister. My brother lives in town, my sister lives out of state, and we are a very close-knit family. And what happened was, about 6 years ago, my father started getting the beginning of dementia, and it just so happened that the church I belonged to had an elder care attorney. We ended up meeting with the attorney, and then I met Beverly, and that's how our family's relationship with Beverly started. And it started with my father's slow decline with dementia. It's probably Alzheimer's, but I guess they can't tell for sure until if they do an autopsy, but that's how it started.
Right, right. So you had, you know, opportunities with a sister out of town and a brother here, and you obviously you have your own jobs, and then your mother. How did your family kind of navigate those communication issues?
We had a couple things going for us. One, our kids were growing, and my wife Ann has just been wonderful, and she was stay at home, and she actually did most of the heavy lifting with the day-to-day dealings with my parents. Another advantage we had was our parents only lived 10 minutes away from us, and my brother happens to be an accountant. So we decided early on that my brother would handle the financial end of it. My wife and I would do the kind of the day-to-day things, and my sister would play the bad cop, come in from out of town, and since she was the baby and the girl, that the parents tend to listen to her a little bit better. Okay. So that's how we got started. And another thing that we're very pragmatic people, and so we got together with the attorney, and while my father still had control of his facilities, his wishes were there be no extraordinary care, and we got it down in writing like 6 different ways with Beverly's help. So we kind of knew what their wishes were. My mother was kind of in denial about end-of-life issues, but she said whatever is good for Jack is good for her, in essence. So we had all the paperwork done. We did some financial planning, and the thought at that time was my father would probably go first. As it turned out, he's still alive, although I would say end-stage dementia. And my mother developed cancer and just passed away, like I said, a short time ago. So we had to kind of switch gears and deal more with my mother as the more immediate. And I have to say, the best thing we ever did, we hired Beverly as a healthcare manager. I didn't even know such a position existed,
Right.
but she kind of walked us through
Right.
A minefield of potential problems,
Right.
and is a tough situation was made tolerable, I guess.
Right. And it sounds like there were a lot of communications issues there, Bev.
There really were. You know, this was a wonderful family who really came from a place of love. But certainly talking to your parents about end of life and what are their wishes are not an easy thing to do.
Right.
And how do you bring those topics up? It's very difficult. But I think when you can be kind of nurtured through,
Right.
sometimes with a professional, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a care manager. It could certainly be a priest, a social worker, a counselor, somebody that you know and that you trust,
Right.
and certainly that your parents know and trust. I think the biggest thing is that families are afraid to bring up those issues.
Right.
They're afraid maybe of what the answers will be, or, you know, am I going to be able to live up to my parents' expectations? I know that a lot of my clients will say, I want to stay in this house for as long as I live. They're going to have to take me out feet first.
Right.
Well, we all know that, you know, sometimes that's very possible.
Right.
And if you have the right things in place, that can be done. And if you have the right services in place, that can be done. But there are times when it can't be done.
Right.
And for example, in Jack's father's case, it became very apparent that he was no longer safe at home.
Right.
He was an incredibly active gentleman who was very physically well. He was a jogger, a rollerblader. He loved to play tennis. We kept him involved with physical activities as much as we could. But then it did become a concern for his safety.
Right.
Would he get lost? Would he, you know, get in the car? We had the whole driving issue. A safe driving evaluation had to be done.
Right.
You know, how do we take the car away? And helping the family and kind of fostering the ability for them to address those issues one by one with the family.
Right.
And certainly, you know, a family that is all on the same page is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
We all know that sometimes families aren't on the same
Right.
page, and oftentimes it's that child that lives out of town. Now, in Jack and Bill's situation, their sister June was very much on the same page and wanted
Right.
to be very supportive. But oftentimes that child that's out of town, when they come back into town, they
Right.
have a hard time believing that their parent is really as frail as the kids in town are trying to explain.
Exactly.
Because in particular with dementia, it can be a very confusing period of time in a diagnosis.
Right, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that in
Great.
a moment. We'll be right back with more Aging is for Everyone.